What is religion? A huge locomotive has rushed over the line, and a small worm that was creeping upon one of the rails saved its life by crawling out of the path of the locomotive. Yet this little worm, so insignificant that it could be crushed in a moment, is a living something, while this locomotive, so huge, so immense, is only an engine, a machine. You say that one has life and the other is only dead matter, and all its powers and strength and speed are only those of a dead machine, a mechanical contrivance. Yet the poor little worm which moved upon the rail, and which the least touch of the engine could have deprived of its life, is a majestic being compared to that huge locomotive. It is a small part of the infinite, and therefore it is greater than this powerful machine. Why should that be so? How do we know the living from the dead? The machine mechanically performs all the movements its maker made for it to perform. Its movements are not those of life. How can we make the distinction between the living and the dead, then? In the living there is freedom, there is intelligence. In the dead all is bound and no freedom is possible, because there is no intelligence. This freedom that distinguishes us from mere machines is what we are all striving for. To be more free is the goal of all our efforts, for only in perfect freedom can there be perfection. This effort to attain freedom underlies all forms of worship, whether we know it or not. If we were to examine the various sorts of worship all over the world, we would see that the rudest of mankind are worshipping ghosts, demons, and the spirits of their forefathers, serpent worship, worship of tribal gods, and worship of the departed ones. Why do they do this? Because they feel in that some unknown way these beings are greater, more powerful than themselves, and limit their freedom. They therefore seek to propitiate these beings in order to prevent them from molesting them, in other words, to get more freedom. They also seek to win favor from those superior beings, to get by gift of the gods what ought to be earned by personal effort. On the whole, this shows that the world is expecting a miracle. This expectation never leaves us, and however we may try, we are all running after the miraculous and extraordinary. What is mind but that ceaseless inquiry into the meaning and mystery of life? We may say that only uncultivated people are going after all these things, but the question still is there. Why should it be so? The Jews were asking for a miracle. The whole world has been asking for the same these thousands of years. There is again the universal dissatisfaction. We make an ideal, but we have rushed only half the way after it when we make a newer one. We struggle hard to attain to some goal and then discover we do not want it. This dissatisfaction we are having time after time, and what is there in the mind, if there is to only be dissatisfaction? What is the meaning of this universal dissatisfaction? It is because freedom is every man's goal. He seeks it ever. His whole life is a struggle after it. The child rebels against law as soon as it is born. Its first utterance is a cry, a protest against the bondage in which it finds itself. This longing for freedom produces the idea of a being who is absolutely free. The concept of God is a fundamental element in the human constitution. In the Vedanta, Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, is the highest concept of God possible to the mind. It is the essence of knowledge, and is by its nature the essence of bliss. We have been stifling that inner voice long enough, seeking to follow law and quiet the human nature. But there is that human instinct to rebel against nature's law. We may not understand what the meaning is, but there is that unconscious struggle of the human with the spiritual, of the lower with the higher mind, and the struggle attempts to preserve one separate life, what we call our individuality. Even hell stands out to this miraculous fact that we are born rebels, and the first fact of life, the inrushing of life itself. Against this we rebel and cry out, "No law for us." As long as we obey the laws, we are like machines, and on goes the universe, and we cannot break it. Laws as laws becomes man's nature. The first inkling of life on its higher level is in seeing this struggle within us to break the bond of nature and to be free. Freedom, O freedom, freedom, O freedom, is the song of the soul. Bondage, alas, to be bound in nature, seems its fate. Why should there be serpent or ghost or demon worship in all these various creeds and forms for having miracles? Why do we say that there is life, there is being in anything? There must be a meaning in all this search, this endeavor to understand life, to explain being. It is not meaningless and vain. It is man's ceaseless endeavor to become free. The knowledge, which we now call science, has been struggling for thousands of years in its attempt to gain freedom. And people ask for freedom. Yet there is no freedom in nature. It is all law. Still the struggle goes on. Nay, the whole of nature, from the very sun to the atoms, is under law, and even for man there is no freedom. But we cannot believe it. We have been studying laws from the beginning, and yet cannot, nay, will not believe that man is under law. The soul cries ever, freedom, O freedom. With the conception of God as a perfectly free being, man cannot rest eternally in his bondage. Higher he must go, and unless the struggle were for himself, he would think it too severe. Man says to himself, I am a born slave, I am bound. Nevertheless, there is a being who is not bound by nature. He is free and master of nature. The conception of God, therefore, is as essential and as fundamental a part of mind as is the idea of bondage. Both are the outcome of the idea of freedom. There cannot be life, even in the plant, without the idea of freedom. In the plant or in the worm, life has to rise to the individual concept. It is there, unconsciously working, the plant living its life to preserve the variety, principle, form, not nature. The idea of nature controlling every step onward overrules the idea of freedom. Onward goes the idea of the material world. Onward moves the idea of freedom. Still the fight goes on. We are hearing about all the quarrels of creeds and sects, yet creeds and sects are just and proper, they must be there. The chain is lengthening, and naturally the struggle increases, but there need be no quarrels, if we only knew that we are all striving to reach the same goal. The embodiment of freedom, the master of nature, is what we call God. You cannot deny him. No, because you cannot move or live without the idea of freedom. Would you come here if you did not believe you were free? It is quite possible that the biologist can and will give some explanation of this perpetual effort to be free. Take all that for granted. Still the idea of freedom is there. It is a fact, as much as the other fact that you cannot apparently get over, the fact of being under nature. Bondage and liberty, light and shadow, good and evil must be there, but the very fact of the bondage shows also this freedom hidden there. If one is a fact, the other is equally a fact. There must be this idea of freedom. While now we cannot see that this idea of bondage in uncultivated man is his struggle for freedom, yet the idea of freedom is there. The bondage of sin and impurity in the uncultivated savage is to his consciousness very small, for his nature is only a little higher than the animal's. What he struggles against is the bondage of physical nature, the lack of physical gratification. But out of his lower consciousness grows and broadens a higher conception of a mental or moral bondage, and a longing for spiritual freedom. Here we see the divine dimly shining through the veil of ignorance. The veil is very dense at first, and the light may be almost obscured, but it is there, ever pure and undimmed. The radiant fire of freedom and perfection. Man personifies this as the ruler of the universe, the one free being. He does not yet know that the universe is all one, that the difference is only in degree in the concept. The whole of nature is worship of God. Wherever there is life, there is this search for freedom, and that freedom is the same as God. Necessarily this freedom gives us mastery over all nature, and is impossible without nature. The more we are knowing, the more we are becoming masters of nature. Mastery alone is making us strong, and if there be some being entirely free and master of nature, that being must have a perfect knowledge of nature, must be omnipresent and omniscient. Freedom must go hand in hand with these, and that being alone who has acquired these will be beyond nature. Blessedness, eternal peace, arising from perfect freedom, is the highest concept of religion, underlying all the ideas of God in Vedanta. Absolutely free existent, not bound by anything, no change, no nature, nothing that can produce a change in him. This same freedom is in you and in me, and is the only real freedom. God is still, established upon his own majestic, changeless self. You and I try to be one with him, but plant ourselves upon nature, upon the trifles of daily life, on money, on fame, on human love, and all these changing forms in nature which make for bondage. When nature shines, upon what depends a shining? Upon God, and not upon the sun, nor the moon, nor the stars. Wherever anything shines, whether it is the light in the sun or in our own consciousness, it is he. He shining, all shines after him. Now we have seen that this God is self-evident, impersonal, omniscient, the knower and master of nature, the Lord of all. He is beyond all worship, and it is being done according to him, whether we know it or not. I go one step further. that at which all marvel, that which we call evil, is his worship too. This too is a part of freedom. Nay, I will be terrible even and tell you that, when you are doing evil, the impulse behind is also that freedom. It may have been misguided and misled, but it was there, and there cannot be any life or any impulse unless that freedom be behind it. Freedom breathes in the throb of the universe. Unless there is unity at the universal heart, we cannot understand variety. Such is the conception of the Lord in the Upanishads. Sometimes it rises even higher, presenting to us an ideal before which at first we stand aghast, that we are in essence one with God. He who is the coloring in the wings of the butterfly and the blossoming of the rosebud is the power that is in the plant and the butterfly. He who gives us life is the power within us. Out of his fire comes life, and the direst death is also his power. He whose shadow is death, his shadow is immortality also. Take a still higher conception. See how we are flying like hunted hares from all that is terrible and like them, hiding our heads and thinking we are safe. See how the whole world is flying from everything terrible. Once when I was in Varanasi, I was passing through a place where there was a large tank of water on one side and a high wall on the other. It was in the grounds where there were many monkeys. The monkeys of Varanasi are huge brutes, and they are sometimes surly. They now took it into their heads not to allow me to pass through their street. So they howled and shrieked and clutched at my feet as I passed. As they pressed closer, I began to run. But the faster I ran, the faster came the monkeys, and they began to bite at me. It seemed impossible to escape, but just then I met a stranger who called out to me, "Face the brutes." I turned and faced the monkeys, and they fell back and finally fled. That is a lesson for all life. Face the terrible, face it boldly. Like the monkeys, the hardship of life fall back when we cease to flee before them. If we are ever to gain freedom, it must be by conquering nature, never by running away. Cowards never win victories. We have to fight fear and troubles and ignorance if we expect them to flee before this. What is death? What are terrors? Do you not see the Lord's face in them? Fly from evil and terror and misery, and they will follow you. Face them, and they will flee. The whole world worships ease and pleasure, and very few dare to worship that which is painful. To rise above both is the idea of freedom. Unless man passes through this gate, he cannot be free. We all have to face these. We strive to worship the Lord, but the body rises between, nature rises between him and us, and blinds our vision. We must learn how to worship and love him in the thunderbolt, in shame and sorrow and sin. All the world has ever been preaching, the God of virtue. I preach a God of virtue and a God of sin in one. Take him if you dare. What is the one way of salvation? Then alone will come to us the truth ultimate, which comes from the idea of oneness. Then will we lost the idea that one is greater than the other. The nearer we approach the law of freedom, the more we shall come unto the Lord, and troubles will vanish. Then we shall not differentiate the door of hell from the gate of heaven, nor differentiate between men and say, "I am greater than any being in the universe." Until we see nothing in the world but the Lord himself, all these evils will beset us, and we shall make all these distinctions, because it is only in the Lord, in the Spirit, that we are all one. And until we see God everywhere, this unity will not exist in us. Two birds of beautiful plumage, inseparable companions, sat upon the same tree, one on the top, one below. The beautiful bird below was eating the fruits of the tree, sweet and bitter. One moment a sweet one, and another a bitter. The moment he ate a bitter fruit, he was sorry. But after a while he ate another, and when it was too was bitter, he looked up and saw the other bird, who ate neither the sweet nor the bitter, but was calm and majestic, immersed in his own glory. And then the poor lower bird forgot, and went on eating the sweet and bitter fruits again, until at last he ate one that was extremely bitter. And then he stopped again, and once more looked up at the glorious bird above. Then he came near and nearer to the other bird, and when he had come near enough, rays of light shone upon him and enveloped him, and he saw he was transformed into the higher bird. He became calm, majestic, free, and found that there had been but one bird at all time on the tree. The lower bird was but the reflection of the one above. So we are in reality one with the Lord. But the reflection makes us see many, as when the one sun reflects in a million dewdrops and seems a million teeny suns. The reflection must vanish if we are to identify ourselves with our real nature, which is divine. The universe itself can never be the limit of our satisfaction. That is why the miser gathers more and more money. That is why the robber robs, the sinner sins. That is why you are learning philosophy. All have one purpose. There is no other purpose in life, save to reach this freedom. Consciously or unconsciously, we are all striving for perfection. Every being must attain to it. The man who is groping through sin, through mystery, through misery, the man who is choosing the path through hells will reach it, but it will take time. We cannot save him. Some hard knocks on his head will help him to turn to the Lord. The path of virtue, purity, unselfishness, spirituality becomes known at last, and what we are all doing unconsciously, we are trying to do consciously. The idea is expressed by St. Paul. The God that ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. This is a lesson for the whole world to learn. What have these philosophies and theories of nature to do, if not to help us to attain to this one goal in life? Let us come to that consciousness of the identity of everything, and let man see himself in everything. Let us be no more the worshippers of creeds or sects with small limited notions of God, but see him in everything in the universe. If you are knowers of God, you will everywhere find the same worship as in your own heart. Get rid in the first place of all these limited ideas and see God in every person, working through all hands, walking through all feet, and eating through every mouth. In every being he lives, through all minds he thinks, he is self-evident, nearer unto us than ourselves. To know this is religion, is faith, and may it please the Lord to give us his faith. When we shall feel that oneness, we shall be immortal. We are physically immortal even, one with the universe. So long as there is one that breathes throughout the universe, I live in that one. I am not this limited little self, I am the universal. I am the life of all the sons of the past. I am the soul of Buddha, of Jesus, of Muhammad. I am the soul of the teachers, and I am all the robbers that robbed, and all the murderers that were hanged. I am the universal. Stand up then, this is the highest worship. You are one with the universe. That only is humility, not crawling upon all fours and calling yourself a sinner. That is the highest evolution, when this veil of differentiation is torn off. The highest creed is oneness. I am so-and-so is a limited idea, not true of the real I. I am the universal. Stand upon that, and ever worship the highest through the highest form. For God is spirit, and should be worshipped in spirit and in truth. Through lower forms of worship, man's material thoughts rise to spiritual worship, and the universal infinite one is at last worshipped in and through the Spirit. That which is limited is material. The Spirit alone is infinite. God is Spirit, is infinite. Man is Spirit, and therefore infinite. And the infinite alone can worship the infinite. We will worship the infinite. That is the highest spiritual worship. The grandeur of realizing these ideas, how difficult it is. I theorize, talk, philosophize, and the next moment something comes against me, and I unconsciously become angry. I forget there is anything in the universe but this little limited self. I forget to say, I am the Spirit. What is this trifle to me? I am the Spirit. I forget it is all myself plain. I forget God. I forget freedom. Sharp as the blade of a razor, long and difficult and hard to cross, is the way to freedom. The sages have declared this again and again, yet do not let these weaknesses and failures bind you. The Upanishads have declared, arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is realized. We will then certainly cross the path, sharp as it is like the razor, and long and distant and difficult though it be. Man becomes the master of gods and demons. No one is to blame for our miseries, just ourselves. Do you think there is only a dark cup of prison if a man goes to look for nectar? The nectar is these, and is for every man who strives to reach it. The Lord himself tells us, give up all these paths and struggle. Do thou take refuge in me. I will take thee to the other shore. Do not be afraid. We hear that from all the scriptures of the world that come to us. The same voice teaches us to say, thy will be done upon earth as it is in heaven, for thine is the kingdom and the power of the glory. It is difficult, all very difficult. I say to myself, this moment I will take refuge in thee, O Lord. Unto thy love I will sacrifice all, and on thine altar I will place all that is good and virtuous. My sins, my sorrows, my action, good and evil, I will offer unto thee. Do thou take them, and I will never forget. One moment I say, thy will be done, and the next moment something comes to try me, and I spring up in rage. The goal of all religions is the same, but the language of the teachers differ. The attempt is to kill the false I, so that the real I, the Lord, will reign. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, said the Hebrew Scriptures. God must be there all alone. We must say, not I, but thou. And then we should give up everything but the Lord. He and he alone should reign. Perhaps we struggle hard, and yet the next moment our feet slip. And then we try to stretch out our hands to Mother. We find we cannot stand alone. Life is infinite, one chapter of which is, thy will be done. And unless we realize all the chapters, we cannot realize the whole. Thy will be done. Every moment the traitor mind rebels against it, yet it must be said again and again, if we are to conquer the lower self. We cannot serve a traitor and yet be saved. There is salvation for all except the traitor, and we stand condemned as traitors, traitors against our own selves, against the majesty of Mother, when we refuse to obey the voice of our higher self. Come what will, we must give our bodies and minds up to the supreme will. Well has it been said by the Hindu philosopher, if man says twice, thy will be done, he commits sin. Thy will be done. What more is needed? Why say it twice? What is good, no more shall we take it back. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forevermore. End of lecture.